So the way this will work is after class, I will save the recording. I'll give it to you, embed it into the Blackboard announcement so you can watch it right there in Blackboard if you want to. I will also give it to you in a web link to my Google Drive so you can download it if you want to, but then I'll also give you an online link to YouTube so that you can watch it live on the internet if you want to. So 3 different options for the classes so that you can go back and listen to them. We will meet like this on Thursdays. I thought that was kind of a better plan for right now. Simply, hold on, let me mute all of you so I don't have any feedback. In other words, so I don't have to hear myself talking because that's the worst. But we'll meet face-to-face like this on Thursdays because I figured that gave you the first half of the week to work on what you need to. And I also have heard that most teachers are having their classes at the first half of the week and then doing like a hybrid at the last half. So try to balance your load. And so I hope this helps a little bit. My plan is that on Tuesdays, I'll still be here in case you have questions. If you want to pop in, say hi, but we won't have a lecture. Does that make sense? So Tuesdays, office hours during this time, I'll still be sitting here in Zoom. And then Thursdays, we'll have our lecture, kind of flip-flop our week a little bit. So this week we're switching gears and we're talking about vocabulary, which is everyone's favorite part of this semester because vocabulary is the #1 thing we teach in all of the content areas. You say, I don't know, my mind just went blank, but you say basketball and you hope that kids know exactly what you're talking about, right? Sometimes. So let me share my screen. Get us going here. So you have a copy of this if you want to download it. Before we get started too much, I just want to talk briefly about what I'm going to go over. So there are all these myths about vocabulary instruction. We're going to talk about the types of vocabulary and the vocabulary categories. We're going to talk about comprehension and teaching it, and then the rest of this is a little bit different. Depending on which version of the textbook you have, it will group the strategies together either in introducing, reinforcing, and teaching, or it'll put it in interpretive, reinforcing, and teaching. And then we'll close. We don't have a vocabulary assignment in this class. I should have updated that and missed it. So before we start talking about the myths with teaching vocabulary, I have a poll for us to do. So go ahead and scan this QR code with your device. And when you do so, it's going to bring up a poll, which is going to ask you, as a teacher, how do you know when students understand the vocabulary that you've taught them or that you're using? How do you know?
Are these like one-word answers or?
No, you can type in as much as you want. It's
Okay.
set up a short answer. The QR code is still up here in the left-hand corner. You can also go to slido.com and type in that code if you're using your mobile device to follow along in class so you can't scan and do everything all at once. That's perfectly fine. Let's talk about some of these. First of all, let's talk about the technology. This is slido.com. I think that's how you say it. And all I did was log in with my Google account and create a group and typed in this poll. It was very easy. They make the QR code for you, and I just posted it for you guys. It's a great way to do that formative assessment or pre-reading type activity in your classes. So let's kind of see what you guys think. So you're a classroom teacher, you're teaching some vocabulary. The principal comes in and says, okay, so your vocabulary lesson was great to get the kids going on this unit. How do you know that they know it? And so we would say they can use it in a sentence, they can make clear connections, regardless of if they can cite the definition verbatim. If they can explain the concept in their own words, that's always good. They can use it when they talk about the topic. They can connect it to prior knowledge and also use their context clues. I feel like students understand it when they are applying it when talking about a related topic, so making relations and applying that knowledge. Let's see if they can use it in scenarios, not just definition. Give them a test, have them put it correctly in a sentence. If they know what the word means, if they're listening, making eye contact, paying attention, that can be hard, right? If they know how to use it in a sentence again, able to explain the definition, use it in a sentence, use it correctly, tell another person what the word means, that they can explain the definition and give you a realistic example of how it's used, context, and then also using it in their everyday language. So not just within content area discussion, but just every day. I want to say that I think that those are all great ways that we know students understand vocabulary. And so I feel like you guys have a really, really good outlook on this topic. Let's talk about some of the myths that we talk about when we begin talking about teaching vocabulary. The first thing is that a lot of people will say, oh, vocabulary is only taught in English class. Not true. Every content, every discipline has vocabulary. The words you use to describe the content and the units that you're teaching is all vocabulary, and it may be new to some students. Myth 2, students should already know most of the vocabulary in my content area since vocabulary is not my responsibility. This is especially true with secondary teachers. Yes, they have had, if you're teaching 10th grade, 9 years, not counting kindergarten, of instruction. They should know when you say a fraction if you're teaching math class. They should know if you say plot when you're talking about English class. They should know what a warm-up is if you're in gym class. But should is the key word. It doesn't mean they do. So it's our job as teachers to always make sure that we explain what our definition is for a topic and make sure we show students how it relates to what they're learning. I always like it. I say, get over it here on the truth part. Kind of silly. Each content area has its own vocabulary, and sometimes teachers will even vary from content to content. For instance, 2 of my best friends teach geometry. Our first year teaching, they taught geometry and I taught English. You would think that they were doing the same thing, but you would be wrong. They taught things differently and they used different vocabulary sometimes when they were teaching the same topics. Here I have on the left some vocab words from English class, vocab words from math class, it's geometry, excuse me. And on the right side, I have some history terms. Being able to say which content area these go with shows that I know the vocabulary, but also being able to use these terms in explaining a topic. That's the highest level of learning. So when we think about the puzzle pieces for kids to learn and to put together the puzzle of your content area, vocabulary is one of the main pieces. For example, in the arts, when you are giving kids direction over what tools they should be using and what methods they should be using, the vocabulary words you choose explain all of that information. And you can't see my slides. There you go. Do you see it now? Yep. Let's see. Yes. All right. My bad. I'm realizing more and more that I need a new computer. So let's see. Back here. Those are my vocab lists. And so when I was talking about the different content areas, that's what they look like. It's typical for content teachers to give these vocabulary words at the start of a unit. And that's perfectly acceptable. That's one way to kind of introduce vocab and get the exercises going. If you are textbook heavy, and a lot of math classes tend to be, then the vocab words are usually given in the margin of the book, and they're also bolded. So sometimes you will have them provided for you as a teacher. And sometimes kids actually create the lists as well. So we already talked briefly about how we know when a student has learned a vocabulary word, but I want to shed more on that. As your book suggests, content area, and you guys even said it over and over, it's not just knowing the definition. It's not really just knowing how to spell the word. It's being able to understand the word within the concepts and apply that in meaningful ways. So the person who said, well, I want my students to be able to apply it to other topics, as in comparing and contrasting, talking about similarities and differences, that's real knowledge of vocabulary. I like to break vocabulary down into two ways. The first thing I like to do is talk about the receptive and the expressive vocabulary. The receptive vocabulary is what you get when you're reading or being read to, whereas the expressive is what you use when you write and when you speak. And there's usually a difference. I can tell how well a student has read a book, read a lecture, and studied by their expressive vocabulary. If I ask students to put together a presentation that talks to me about the importance of literature in the classroom, say I'm teaching English teachers, I would expect there to be certain vocabulary words there. I would expect them to talk about different genres. That's a vocab word. I would expect them to talk about the different learning styles and those types of words. Everything that you read and listen to is connected to your expressive. And that's really important for us to realize. When students aren't doing the reading or they're not doing the listening, the expressive becomes very vague. And so usually we give kids strategies to help them be successful. So these are our three types of categories of vocabulary. You have your general vocabulary that students are owning and using. These are the words they understand. Are we reading a book today? Right? When they get to ninth grade, they know what the word book is. They have a very set idea of what a book is. It has chapters. I'm going to read it in chapters. The teacher's going to tell me what pages to read. That's not always true. By the time they get to us, we start mixing up a little bit. The polysemantic is where we look at the multiple meanings of words. And we realize that the vocabulary that we learn, say, in science class is also being used in math class. Polysemantic, I put a sad face on. Why? Because this is where students get confused and they get sad. A base in chemistry class is a lot different than a base in algebra 2. So we have to keep in mind that just because a vocabulary word is familiar to them, it doesn't mean they understand it in the content of or context of your content. That's a mouthful. But we have to be very careful. And so if you have a word that has multiple meanings across different disciplines, it's really important to make sure that you're explaining what it means in your class. And then there's the technical that is really only related to one discipline. Mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell, only relates to science class. Metaphor is figurative language and only relates to English class. And so these are our three different categories, for vocabulary. When you start testing students for vocabulary, you start maybe giving them quizzes or tests, which are very common for vocabulary. You have to label the level of comprehension. So most secondary lesson plans have a space for the comprehension level or reading level that is being assessed by students. The bottom level is just recognizing the word. being able to say it, spell it. Renting the word is being able to define it. That's just the literal meaning of the word. That goes a step farther when you ask students, like you said, to take ownership of the word, to relate it to something, to use it in a sentence would be the interpretive. Actually applying the vocabulary word and being able to give examples, apply it to scenarios, and use it in problem solving is the highest level of vocabulary usage, and that's our application level. So when we're looking at these levels, we try to find strategies depending on where we are. For instance, if I was a Spanish 1 teacher, I'm just down here at the bottom. I want my students probably to just start recognizing the words and telling me what they mean. Maybe towards the end of Spanish 1 and in Spanish 2, I want them to start with the literal, definitional knowledge, and then take it to the interpretive. Start using it in a sentence, and also start telling me when they hear it what it means. So this brings us back to, how do we teach vocabulary? Because teaching vocabulary is teaching the content. So the process of teaching vocabulary just mirrors our learning cycle. You have the pre-teaching of the vocabulary, introducing the terms, finding the terms, discussing the terms. You have the during the learning cycle, where students are interacting with the vocabulary, they're comparing and contrasting it. And then you have the relational, where they're talking about how the term is used across disciplines, what the term means in this context of this scenario. Talking about non-examples is a great way to teach vocab. So before I talk about the traditional method, I want us to take a brain break. Hello. There you guys are. You look tired. I'll accept Niles. Niles always is like ready to go. Rayvon even looks a little tired today. There's a smile. So off the top of your head, what type of vocabulary words are you thinking right now for your class? If somebody came in and said, what's one vocabulary word that students in your class have to know that's important for your content area? Can you think of one? Ooh, Stephanie said landscape. Oh, you're always so deep with your words. I love it. Ooh, composition. Okay, the art people, man. You guys have these great words. Let me give you a place to put them, because I want you to share them with each other.
Like body something you tend to body mass and you don't even know your HR, your heart rate.
Oh, that's good too. Hold on one second. So what I thought we would do, can you guys see all my donuts on the screen? I'm going to have us share 10 words that you can think of for your content area that would be important. This is called a Padlet. And Padlet is like a giant online clipboard that students can add little clips, little sticky notes to. I was creating this afternoon, and I thought, ooh, let's do donuts. That's fun, because we're just living in this fun environment right now. So, can you guys see that QR code okay? Scan this QR code and it will bring you to the pad where you can hit the plus and you could add, I said 10 terms because I thought 10 would be kind of easy for us to do.
10 each?
Just, what do you mean in each? Who was that? Sorry.
Me. Nice. 10 a person? You want 10 from each person?
Yeah. Try to come up with 10 if you can for your subject area. You can think of, I know some of you teach in the gym and in health, and in art, I know some of you are teaching in lecture versus lab, so our studio. And same thing with music. So you can pick your environment or mix it all up.
Okay.
Those of you who are K through 12, you can pick whatever content area you feel like you'd like to do inclusion in. Say you think, oh, I'd really like to do inclusion, in the English classroom. We'll try to think of 10 terms. Is the QR code working okay from where you are? Yes. I see heads bobbing, so yes. Okay, I'm going to take this down That way we can all see. So 10 vocabulary words, and I'm going to delete this one that says pronoun. Here we go. You can type your words. You don't have to comment on them. You can type them in here, but you can also do it like Emily's doing, where she labeled it as art and then she's commenting with her 10. That's another fun way to do it. I see some people are on my comment as well. Ooh, resting heart rate, exercise. Ooh, arranging. That must be a music person. And so the Padlet is another great way to do vocabulary. You could create a whole set of vocab cards. You could say, like, here's 8 vocab words. You could have the students comment with pictures, web links, guesses at definitions, using the word in a sentence. You could really make it fun here on this pad and then have a whole unit of vocab words on here. Now, balance is a word that could be art and could be music, right? That's one of our words that, you know, could be the polysemantic. And we would need to really make sure that we're explaining what those are. So then over here with music, you're getting me with some of, what is this, Italian? I love all these art terms. My husband's really into art. We go to museums and I'm like, oh, that's pretty. And he likes to tell me all about it. Emily, you said Baroque, and I instantly thought of the Beauty and the Beast when he says, if it isn't Baroque, don't fix it. I couldn't help it. Teaching online and being stuck in the house with little kids makes my mom humor even worse. Ooh, I see lots of good physical ones. Body composition, flexibility, agility popping up here. Ooh, and Spanish ones, conjugate. Yeah, Megan, if you ask a kid to conjugate, they might misinterpret what that means. What is calisthenics? Look around here and look at some of the other areas that aren't part of your discipline. All of you have a high school diploma, and most of you are in your 3rd or 4th year of college. So you have had probably a music class, English class, foreign language class, years of physical education, but do you know all of these vocabulary words? This is what teachers are saying. Kids in my discipline need to be able to understand these words to understand my lecture. If we can't remember after being in school for 12 or 13 years, we can't expect our kids to remember either. And all these poor kids that are going to be out of school till September will definitely forget all of these terms, right? Wow, so many. Hold on. I love when the Spanish and French and German teachers started on indirect and direct objects, because suddenly everyone knows how to find it in the English language too. It's like a cheat for us English teachers. I just wait until they teach it and then I don't have to. Just kidding. All right, so we'll take a moment and stop here. All right. So what did you realize from doing the vocabulary activity so far? Feel free to turn your mics on. Stephanie said, I realize we have words in common with other subjects, and that's that polysemantic, and that's really important for us secondary teachers because we can get frustrated, right? Like, oh, why don't you know this? This is 11th grade English. You should know this. And it's because maybe they learned it in Spanish, and the Spanish teacher taught it differently. And also something like an indirect object is in a physically different place from where it is in the English language. So it varies, right, Megan? Yes, I got one. Yes. I mess up so many of your disciplines, but I try really hard. What else have you learned from this activity? I love teaching online. It's always like everybody staring at me. Let me teach you some strategies. And then you can really say, hey, I learned something, maybe. All right, get back to our lecture and I'll teach you some strategies. So the traditional method for teaching vocabulary, this is probably how you were taught vocab. Let's all copy the definition on our worksheet. Let's make flashcards for homework or a foldable. How fun! Now tonight for homework, write a sentence using the word. Your quiz is on Friday and you have to use the correct word in the sentence to fill in the blank. What are the weaknesses of doing something like this? Speak up, share. Don't be scared. I'm unmuting all of you. You're all unmuted. Who wants to share?
If students are only learning the definition, they're not applying it to their everyday lives, so they're not going to retain the knowledge for a long period of time, just long enough to get by for the quiz.
This is true. And then what happens after the quiz?
Then it just falls out of their brain. I don't know.
It does, right? Did you guys cram it all for the test or the quiz and then forget it after that?
Yep.
Yep. 100%. We all did it.
All right.
Okay, I'm going to mute you all so you don't have to hear the feedback. But you can unmute yourself as well. But this is the traditional method. And one of the weaknesses is like in and out. It doesn't stay if you're just focusing on the definition. Is this important for beginning readers? Yes. If you are elementary majors and you were taking acquisition of reading or an acquisition of language, you would learn that spelling and all of these things are so important. But what we're talking about is disciplinary reading and writing. We're talking about people who already know how to read and write and making sure they understand the content. Having them just write all the definitions isn't going to help them. How many of you had teachers who had you rewrite all the definitions that were already given and written out in the end of your textbook? Why were we doing that? They're all right there on page 5. Why are we rewriting them out? And so we have to keep that in mind. While those types of strategies may be helpful for terms that are in a different language, very new terms that are very difficult, terms that are in the Latin or Italian, we have to take it a step farther when we teach. So strategies for introducing our students to vocabulary. Hands-on experience, letting them participate in something and then having them explain what happened. And as they're explaining, giving them that very disciplinary specific language, terminology, and jargon. Say, well, I was doing this and then this happened. Okay, so that's this strategy. In-class presentation, showing them pictures, showing them videos. Semantic mapping is breaking down the word. So if you're teaching them roots, prefixes, suffixes, that can be really important, especially in subjects where there is a lot of Latin. Concept or definition map is exactly what it sounds like, maybe doing a big bubble map, circle chart. A semantic feature analysis is very similar to the semantic map, except that you're actually looking at what the words might imply. So OUS as a root means full of. In this chapter, I'm reading my book, maybe, it's talking about liquids. So maybe we're talking about stuff that is full of liquid. Possible sentences is giving kids a list of vocabulary words and making them write sentences. Not even knowing what the vocab word means. Try to write a sentence with it. Visual associations, showing them pictures, having them label. The Freyer model we will look at in just a second, but all of these strategies for introducing can also be used for teaching. Even farther, your textbook gives you even more, but I like to show you a couple more. Can you all see the building science vocabulary YouTube video? I'm making sure I'm on the right screen here. Yes, I am. Okay. I have two short 2-minute videos from one of the local school districts where they talk about and show you how their teachers are building vocabulary. One's for science and one is for English. But I think the strategies would work for any class.
Dr. Ripper, we can't hear the audio.
video.
Not getting good volume?
No, we can't hear it at all.
Let's see. We're up. Sound better?
In pairs, I want you to identify vocabulary words.
Yeah, that's better.
Find
Better?
5
Cool.
words that are difficult for you to understand. I was really interested in having students incorporate bigger segments of vocabulary into their existing knowledge. So what I like to do is have students identify the words themselves as opposed to me standing in front of them and explicitly telling them to define this set of words. You may already know the definition of a word just by looking at its root, even though you can't pronounce it. Okay, so let's focus on the words that are just completely ambiguous to us. I take special care to tell them to use words that are of interest to them because sometimes it may not be what you know, it may be what you want to know.
We chose this word because we understood the ability part, but not the verbal part. So we wanted to find out what the first part was. So that's why I was interested in that word.
Okay, well, let me stop you right there. We're going to focus more on the beginning part of the word, okay? Think about the word vulnerable. By having the students find the words themselves, we're generating not just 5 words, but maybe 25 words out of a classroom that'll be brand new to most of the students. Actually, that word has come up a lot in several different groups. And I think we may have talked about it in a previous class, that our bridge is a cantilever bridge, the Crescent City connection, and that's probably why it refreshed something in your memory. If we want to increase their levels of reading and writing to a higher level, that means we also need to increase the level of vocabulary. Unfortunately, a lot of high school students are technically reading below their grade level. So introducing them to a higher level of vocabulary is one strategy that we can use to increase their text complexity and their reading comprehension skills.
So I chose that one. This is a new one for me this semester because even though I don't have science majors in this class, I think the strategies that she's using are very familiar. Many of you probably had teachers ask you to scan something and bring in 5 or 6 vocab words tomorrow or on Monday. Read through the chapter and keep list of words that you didn't understand. It's a great way to help improve their vocabulary, but also build a working vocabulary list that you haven't chosen. And that's a really great strategy for student leadership, student ownership, and a student-centered learning environment. So my next one is cheesy. I'm just going to go ahead and say it. It's cheesy. But I love using the paint chips from like Lowe's to do vocabulary. So I want to show you what it looks like. I know it's cheesy, but you'll see them all over schools, and they really are effective.
There are lots of ways that teachers can approach teaching vocabulary. I have new vocabulary cards because in every unit I will give them conceptual vocabulary words. All right, so I'm going to send these around. Take one that you want. And I've discovered that in order for students to really engage in the literacy around a concept, in order to write about it, talk about it, read about it, they have to have language about it. This particular strategy is taking paint chips and taking the vocabulary word and putting it on one shade of the paint color, and then putting different versions of the word and then finally synonyms of the word on that paint chip. Okay, so those are coming around. Every time they use that word or any of the words on that paint chip during class, they have a little sticker and they get to post it on the wall on their way out. I want to read them and I want you to say them back to me. because I am afraid that if you get a word that you don't know how to pronounce, that you're going to be a little self-conscious, and even though you think you might want to use the word, you might not raise your hand and do it. All right, so here we go. Juxtaposition. Juxtaposition. Dichotomy. Dichotomy. And two of my classes this semester are having a little competition with each other to see who can fill up their white poster the fastest. Bragging rights. They win bragging rights. And I think that the correct teacher response, of course, would be that they win a more robust vocabulary.
Super cheesy. I know, I know. So if we had been in class today, we would have done paint chips. I'm sure you were instantly like, oh yeah, she was totally going to make us do that. Yeah, I totally was going to make you do that. I did worry that it would give some of my art education majors a little anxiety to write all over the colors. But I do think it's a good activity to do for vocabulary, and you can make brackets and fun like this block against this block type games and gamify your class, and that is a lot of fun. One of my friends that teaches geometry, she does a lot of stuff like that with her class. She has a 100% pass rate in geometry, and that is a lot of vocabulary, a lot. But she does the little paint squares. She does competitions and brackets, and it really, really works for her students. What she doesn't do is vocabulary quizzes at all, because as we know, and as we said earlier, those aren't really going to help our students learn everything. So let me go back and talk just about a few more strategies. So one of the things that we have as a goal as teachers is to make our students independent with the vocabulary. It's not just being able to recite a definition, it's being able to speak about it. And you can kind of do multiple different strategies. I tend to stay with the dictionaries, the context clues, and the structured overview as a teacher. And I look back and I think, oh, I could have done better. But as a new teacher, that's where I was comfortable. I was comfortable with, okay, look up the definition of the word. Let me teach you how to diagram the word. And now let's figure out what the word means in context of this sentence. But other ways to include vocabulary and to really build independence with your students is to work on the etymology. What is the history of the word? If you have a student who's really into history, this is a great activity for them. They're going to be like, oh, I'm going to look it up. I'm going to find that it comes from the Latin of this word, which means this. And then here's the word in another language. That could really be a good student teaching student type activity. One of the other things is the vocabulary self-collection. These are huge with middle school teachers, where students are collecting their own vocabulary as they hear you teaching, as they hear their peers talking, as they're doing their reading, and they are in essence building their own dictionary or their own glossary. And so that's a lot of fun as well. I've seen middle school teachers especially do this as a grade each marking period. They have to have a certain amount of words. So I mentioned the Freyer model earlier. Students in my classes typically hate the Freyer model. And I'm not sure if it's because you guys were probably mostly taught with bubble maps were huge and Foursquare was huge, which we'll talk about in a second, but that the Freyer model doesn't tend to be very popular. However, if you look at it, it looks a lot like a Foursquare. So the Freyer model, you put the concept in the middle, whatever the word is. On the left-hand side, you have the students list essential characteristics of that concept. Then non-essential characteristics to the right, examples back on the left, and non-examples on the right. So Foursquare and bubble maps tend to be a lot easier because they're lower level vocabulary learning. It's what are things that relate it to the topic, examples of the topic, history of the topic, that type of thing. But that you may not, hold on, let me make sure I'm not missing anyone. But you may not ever get to the opposites. And the Freyer model pushes you to take your students to the non-examples. So if I was going over a metaphor, I would talk about an essential characteristic of a metaphor is comparing two dissimilar objects, right? I would give an example. A non-essential characteristic would be a similarity, like, or excuse me, a simile. And then I would give an example of a simile down here. And that's how I would have my students really differentiate between similes and metaphors. And this is where the Freyer model can really be strong. So here I did simile, and then I gave you some examples and non-examples. Strong as an ox, quiet as a mouse, looks like an angel. And then anything that would be metaphor or personification would be a non-example. So a foursquare, as I said earlier, many of you may have done foursquare in school. They weren't popular when I was in school, but I remember somewhere around 2008. Foursquare became really popular. All my students would come to class and say, oh, can we do a foursquare? Can we do a foursquare? So somewhere along the way in the mid to late 2000s, foursquare became a really popular way of teaching vocabulary. You put the term on the left, students give their own definition, you come up with a synonym or antonym or both, and then you draw yourself a picture. I think this is a great way to introduce a new term, but I think you have to take it a step farther and use a Freyer model so that students are actually applying that new knowledge. Because when they talk about comparing and contrasting, coming up with non-examples, that's what they're doing. And that's a higher level of speaking and thinking. Here is an example of a concept of definition map. You put the term in the middle, you categorize the term, and then you add a comparison term here. You come up with all the properties as you can, and then you're supposed to come up with 3 examples or illustrations of the term. I like that it says illustrations on here for your learners who maybe would prefer to draw themselves a picture rather than write themselves everything out in words. I had a lot of students who would rather take their notes in pictures. They'd rather sketch out what they read than write an outline. And so that's a benefit here for sure. Here's one that I filled out. I used simile again to kind of show you what it looks like. So in the end, you've already taught vocabulary. You think the students know it, or maybe it was supposed to be taught last year. Here are some things you can do to help reinforce the vocabulary. In application, making sure to use the words in writing and discourse. You can say you have to use these 5 words in your essay. Interpretive, you could have students do lists, groups, and labels, word sorts and categorizing, different group graphic organizers that they can make. I love when students make their own graphic organizers. You say, organize the term and the definition however you want, and they come up with the coolest stuff. You could do concept circles or circle maps. You could do the foursquare or Freyer model. You could have students write analogies. They really hate those, but they're really good puzzles and kind of forcing that different type of engagement. And then the semantic feature analysis as well. Word perception and literal meaning are very low. So if you look at my arrow to the left, I'm expressing that the word perception and literal is going to have a lower level of engagement because that's just filling in blanks, spelling words, finding the words in a crossword puzzle or, word search type thing. But as you go up into activities in the interpretive and then stuff up the higher level of application, it's increasing their cognitive engagement. In other words, it's making it harder. It's making them learn it on a deeper level. A lot of teachers spend their time down at the bottom here, and that's why after you took the spelling quiz, you forgot what all those words mean. So that's all I have for us for vocabulary. I didn't want to go through and read to you the textbook chapter and all the different strategies, but there are a handful of more vocabulary strategies in there as well. What I'd like you to do is really spend some time reflecting upon which strategies you like as a learner, maybe which ones you'd use as a teacher. Put that all in your learning reflection like you usually do. Before I see you next Thursday, jump into chapter 9. It's actually a shorter chapter, and don't forget to take your quiz. And then we will pick up with that. We will do 2 more weeks of learning different strategies before we start on our big disciplinary literacy project, which I'll be talking about probably end of next week. I will talk a little bit more about that. Let me get back here to you guys. Hello, are you still awake? I told my Tuesday class 45 minutes in Zoom is about all that I expect from students because it can get really, really hard to sit longer than 45 minutes. Like some of you are starting to dance. It's cool, you can dance. So Stephanie's the only one who laughs at me. Hi. So any questions about vocabulary? Nothing at all. Vocabulary instruction, I think, as a teacher is something that you're like, yeah, I can do that. I can give them this worksheet. I can do that activity. But my goal here was to at least highlight a few strategies that didn't involve, here's a list of words, use them in a sentence, or here's a list of words, find them in a word search, that type of thing. I wanted you guys to hopefully think of ways to make students use the vocabulary and learn the vocabulary at a higher level. Now, before I let you guys go, I finished and I unlocked the whole grade book. So you should be able to see all my feedback from this semester for everything but your annotated bibs. I downloaded them and I've only read one so far. I think it was Andrea's. And I will hopefully have those finished out before the end of the week because they're typically an easy read. Are there any questions about anything that we have coming up or our schedule? Any suggestions or things you'd like to see? No? Niles is like, no, I'm good. Niles, your wall is so white. You need some artwork or something.
At my cousin's house.
Ah, I was wondering.
Yeah, I got some stuff up in my room now.
Yeah. All right, guys, I'm going to go ahead and end, but our class goes to 4:15. So my plan each week is to be done by 4 and then leave that last at least 15 minutes for people to stay after and chat, to talk if they need to. And just remember, on Tuesdays, we will still have class time. I will still be here. So if you need to log in and chat and ask questions, you can do that as well. If not, I will see you for our lectures and our classes on Thursday. Okay? Bye, everyone. Bye, Marley. Wave. Bye.
Bye.
I'm going to turn the recording